You know the story already, even if you pretend you don't. Something explodes fast, everyone joins in late, and then the lights go out so suddenly it feels personal. People call it luck or timing, but the truth is uglier. Most of them were never investing, they were escaping. This is a story about lemon tea shop energy, a meteor crossing the F&B sky, rising like it can't be stopped, then disappearing like it never existed. A beverage business, a street culture, a wave of young excitement. And underneath it all, the same psychological machinery we see in love, money, identity, and social media, herd behavior, denial, and the addiction to being part of the moment. When you understand the mechanics, you stop being impressed by the sparkle. You start recognizing the trap. Before we go deep, lock in one idea. Business, like dating, like careers, like status chasing, runs on the same rule. The winners don't always have better taste, they have faster pattern recognition, and they deploy it before the crowd catches up. The crowd is always last. The crowd is always confident. The crowd always thinks it will be different this time, and then it isn't. So what happened to the tea place that everyone swore was back? Why did it dominate from streets to suburbs? Why did it feel like a cheat code for people who weren't friendmeners? And why did so many owners end up with empty storefronts, faded signs, and that silent shame where you don't even want to talk about what you lost? Welcome to the hidden self, where we stop pretending, where we point at the uncomfortable internal motives people edit out of their own memories. Because when you look closely enough, the real product was never the drink. It was belonging. The first part of the truth is about desire, not the drink, the desire around the drink. Back in the early years, the street tea culture wasn't a business model. It was a social ritual. You'd see the same pattern in every neighborhood. Low plastic chairs, coke sweating, friends sitting too close, sunflower seeds crunching like punctuation. It wasn't luxury. It wasn't brand. It was cheap freedom in your hand. You could afford it. You could show up. You could be seen without pretending to be somebody else. Tea back then wasn't just tasty. It was psychologically protective. When you're young, you don't only want pleasure. You want permission. You want an excuse to be loud, relaxed, slightly messy, and still feel normal. Street tea gave that permission. It was the antidote to the bottled rules-heavy world. Schools, uniforms, deadlines, parents, exam pressure, and then you step outside and the world loosens its grip. People underestimate this. They assume customers are rational. They assume customers are choosing based on quality alone. But the crowd buys permission. It buys a stage. It buys a place where it doesn't have to perform adulthood. So the tea took over. It became default. If you asked where people are going, the answer wasn't, let's try something new. It was, let's go there. The place itself became an identity. Then the first betrayal happened, and it wasn't the drink's fault. Taste changes. Not because consumers magically woke up smarter, but because boredom is a predator. It looks harmless. It smiles. It waits. The moment the novelty wears off, people don't evaluate the product. They abandon the story they were telling themselves. And once abandonment begins, it spreads like contagion. When a foreign-style milk tea wave landed, it didn't just offer a new flavor. It offered a new self-image. Milk tea came with a new aesthetic. Colder, cleaner, shinier, more photogenic. It created an upgraded social scene where you could be both young and curated. It came with toppings, it came with options, it came with a reason to post, a reason to dress slightly differently, a reason to talk slower and sound more sophisticated. The street tea didn't disappear because it was bad. It disappeared because it stopped matching the self that people wanted to perform online. In those years, you could hear it in the language. People stopped talking about going to a tea shop and started talking about going to get milk tea. The transaction became a status statement. Even when the price was higher, people paid it because the price wasn't the real cost. The real cost was time spent becoming that version of yourself. Between then and the next turning point, the tea became background, a memory. And here's the hidden psychology most people refuse to name. When a trend goes quiet, people don't just lose a product, they lose a feeling of momentum. They lose a shortcut to identity. They lose a social schedule. So when a trend returns, people don't ask, is it good? They ask, can I feel alive again? That brings us to the meteor. In early years, the tea returned with the force of something that never died. It wasn't a comeback. It was a resurrection engineered for modern attention. And it didn't grow slowly. It grew like a rumor that became real. You could see it on sidewalks, in alleys, in places that didn't make sense for a street beverage. Billboards popped up. Storefronts multiplied. Suddenly, the same conversation was everywhere. Where do you go for tea? Have you tried the new one? Let's meet there. Bring your friends. Take photos. Sit outside. Make noise. The city looked like it was vibrating. And if you were watching from a distance, you probably thought it was because the drink improved. Some people will insist, no, it's all about quality. It's the brand. But the deeper answer is not quality. It's alignment. The new model aligned with 4 psychological needs at the exact time the crowd was starving for them. First, it hit the nerve of a generation that needs visibility, not silence. The core customer base was the people born in the late 90s to early 2000s, raised with social media as a weather system. Their relationship to life is not quiet productivity, it's public participation. They're not just consuming content, they're training themselves to be content. They want open spaces because open spaces feel like freedom, and freedom feels like authenticity. They don't want a sealed, serious room where you must whisper, sit still, and behave like an adult. The new tea shop didn't replicate the old street chaos. It designed chaos with purpose. You had loud door sounds. You had music that didn't apologize. You had the crunch of sunflower seeds like a soundtrack. You could throw the wrapper to the floor, and nobody looked shocked because the whole environment was built around messiness. In a place where coffee shops require posture and politeness, this tea shop gave permission to behave like a teenager again. Not in a childish way, in a self-protective way. Because when you're stressed, you need to feel you're not trapped. Second, it solved the economy of the starving crowd. Let's be honest, people don't become entrepreneurs because they love business. They become entrepreneurs because they want control. And they also become customers because they want joy without financial punishment. When the crowd saw the tea's price point, it looked like relief. A drink you can buy without guilt. A hangout you can afford without doing math on your bank balance. In a period when a milk tea habit can turn into a daily expense that hurts, the tea offered a feeling of breathing room. People don't remember the price tag. They remember the emotional math. They remember that they could sit there for hours. They remember Wi-Fi. They remember the vibe. They remember being able to order again without fear. The tea shop became a budget-friendly social center. Third, it evolved the product while keeping the identity. This is where a lot of wannabe owners get confused. They think the product must be revolutionary to survive. No, survival is not about invention. Survival is about packaging familiarity into something that feels upgraded. The new shops didn't just sell tea, they sold an updated experience that looked closer to professional retail while still preserving street symbolism. Glass cups that look clean, straws that look hygienic, uniforms, electronic ordering, consistent seating, a sign that glows like a promise. Even if you couldn't explain it, your nervous system understood. This isn't a random stall. This is a place you can trust to reflect you properly. People pay extra for that nervous system reassurance. That's why brands matter even when the liquid inside is not worth the obsession. And then the menu expanded. Not because tea suddenly became more magical, but because variety creates suspense. Variety keeps people curious. Variety makes the customer feel like they're not stuck in one choice. They can sample, they can show friends, they can post something new every week. Fourth, it was cheap enough to invite investors. This is the part where the fantasy begins. People heard stories. They saw the shop next to them printing money. They saw friends texting that they made profit. And then they did what most humans do when they're scared. They believed the story without checking the mechanics. The entry cost was low. The process looked simple. The equipment wasn't intimidating. The rent could be negotiated. The supply costs seemed manageable. So the shop became a real possibility for office workers and groups of friends. This is not entrepreneurship. This is hope in a costume. And once hope gets dressed up as strategy, it turns into a stampede. The largest winners were not the ones with the best bar skills. They were the ones who understood what sells, not cups, but a model. They built a system that could be copied quickly. They sold not just the drink, but the blueprint. And once a blueprint is sold, the money flows from fees, from franchise access, from management structures, from proprietary supply. The real profit source wasn't only the tea, it was the ecosystem built on top of the tea. This is why people think they're buying a shop, but they're actually buying a chance to ride a wave and then pay ongoing costs to stay on that ride. Now the uncomfortable shift. Waves don't crash because the water is bad. Waves crash because the beach fills up too fast. So why did the tea empire collapse? You can trace it like an autopsy. There are multiple causes, but they share the same root. The crowd was encouraged to ignore risk. First, the supply exploded faster than real demand. During the peak, one street could host 5 to 7 shops. Sometimes even within the same chain, 2 locations sat a few hundred meters apart, competing against each other while pretending they weren't. The market wasn't infinite. People are not coins. People have limited schedules, limited budgets, and limited novelty capacity. But the owners didn't calculate demand. They calculated excitement. They followed the crowd's eyes, not the market's physics. When supply multiplies, customers get divided. Average purchase drops. Revenue declines. Fixed costs remain. Rent doesn't become cheaper because your brand is trendy. Staff still needs salaries. Electricity still runs. Cleaning still costs. Debt still accumulates. So the later entrants suffer the most. The first ones enjoy the early shine. The last ones enjoy the early bankruptcy. Second, the barrier to entry was too low, and quality control died. When it's easy to open a shop, it attracts people who are not operators. It attracts people who are betters. Some owners cut corners. They used cheaper ingredients. They diluted. They didn't manage inventory. They treated the shop like a side hustle instead of a consistent craft. The result is predictable. The product becomes inconsistent. The taste loses its identity. The customer notices. Customers don't complain politely forever. They stop coming, and the internet accelerates that shift. One bad experience becomes a story. One comparison becomes a trend reversal. Then trust erodes, and once trust erodes, you don't get customers back with a brighter sign. You only get them back with real quality over time, and time is the enemy of people running on borrowed money. Third, seasonality turned into a financial weapon. This is the killer detail most people ignore because they're dazzled by summer success. Outdoor tea shops depend on weather. When the air is warm, people linger. They want that exposed street vibe. They want to feel the breeze, hear the sounds, smell the city. The shop becomes a social magnet. But winter arrives, and suddenly nobody wants to sit outside freezing while buying a cold drink. People move indoors. They switch to hot drinks. They choose cafes where you can escape the wind. A model built for outdoor summer suddenly faces a revenue collapse. And when revenue collapses, costs don't collapse. Rent continues. Staff continues. Electricity continues. Debt continues. So the shop closes, not because people hate tea, but because the business was never designed to survive the off-season. It was designed to win the hype season. Fourth, the urban legality and public order conflict crushed the experience. Street seating is not a neutral decision. It is an agreement with the environment. It's an occupation of public space. It's noise. It's waste. It blocks traffic. At small scale, it's tolerated. At massive scale, it becomes a nuisance. Once the number of shops exploded, the externalities also exploded. Trash from sunflower seeds, bikes everywhere, awkward congestion, litter, sound, residents complaining, authorities cracking down. When the city restricts the occupation of sidewalks, the model breaks. It's not just about permission, it's about the customer experience. The experience was partly the street. If you take away the street, the product loses a big chunk of its emotional value. Customers will happily choose a cafe with indoor comfort over a cramped, regulated space. They will not choose inconvenience just because the brand used to be fun. Fifth, the trend fatigue returned. This generation didn't just like tea, it liked novelty, it liked being first, it liked having new options. But trends are like dopamine. They spike, then they crash, and when the crash comes, the brain hunts for the next stimulus. Something else arrives, something colder, something cheaper, something more branded. New beverages enter, new spaces with air conditioning appear, new international vibe stores open with lower prices, and suddenly your tea shop feels like yesterday. Tea had no permanent defenses against this, because its core value was never deep product mastery. Its core value was social timing. When timing dies, there is no miracle recipe to revive it. Sixth, and this one is the final punch in the story. COVID killed the crowd. Everything we discussed depends on people gathering. The business lives inside the social event. It needs friends coming together. It needs groups lingering. It needs the noise of shared time. Then society changes. Restrictions tighten. People are told to stay apart. The crowd evaporates overnight. And tea shops cannot easily pivot the way some food businesses can. You can grab food to go, you can package many items, but the emotional engine of this tea shop is the hangout, the conversation, the shared experience, the street energy. To-go tea is not the same thing. The customer loses the ritual, they lose the vibe, they lose the performance space. So sales drop. Owners who entered with loans in late peak times can't survive months of reduced income. They run out of cash, they close, not because they were incompetent, because the model was fragile and dependency on public gathering became lethal. Now let's talk about the hidden self part, because this is where the real sting lives. Most people who rushed into this wave didn't see it as a business risk. They saw it as a story that would rescue them from feeling powerless. They saw someone else's success and translated it into meaning. Meaning like this: if they can do it, maybe I can escape my job too. Or if I invest early enough, I'll be safe. Or if I copy the model, I'll get the same outcome. What they refused to admit is that they were not buying a business. They were buying emotional relief. They were buying the fantasy that money can be obtained without enduring uncertainty. They were buying the fantasy that social buzz equals financial stability. They were buying the fantasy that the crowd's attention is permanent. And when the wave disappears, the shame is not just financial, it's identity collapse.